Okay, today we set out on a journey not to conquer, not to rush, but to remember. To remember something we may have forgotten perhaps not just yesterday or last year, but long before we were born. Today we ask a question that is both ancient and intimate. A question that has haunted philosophers, mystics, and poets for millennia. A question that floats gently in the quiet hours of the night. When the noise of the world has finally faded, what do you take with you when you die? We live in a world of accumulation. We gather things, clothes, trophies, stories, dreams. We collect memories, skills, money, degrees, and digital followers. We try to build a fortress of meaning around our lives. But what happens to all that when the final moment arrives? Plato, perhaps the most enigmatic of the ancient philosophers, offers an answer that is both unsettling and sublime. It does not fit neatly within modern categories. It is not religious dogma, nor is it mere metaphor. It is a theory, yes, but also a mirror to examine not just how we die, but how we live. In the next 35 minutes, we will walk through quiet temples of thought, through the marketplaces of ancient Athens, the shadows of Stoic resolve, the flickering candles of Buddhist meditation, and even into the cool soil of forgotten graves. We will move slowly, with care. There will be no grand drama. Only the soft uncovering of something profound. You don't need to believe everything. You don't need to agree. You only need to be still and listen. Imagine a morning in Athens in the 4th century BCE. The sun, soft and amber, spills across the polished white stone of the agora. Merchants lay out their olives and pottery. Philosophers gather under shaded porticos. Children chase each other past carved columns. You hear distant voices, measured, rhythmical, questioning. It's the sound of inquiry, the melody of the academy where Plato teaches. Life here is not so different from ours. People fall in love. They cook lentils with garlic and oil. They gamble, laugh, argue about politics, write poetry, and tell stories under the stars. Most days feel ordinary, but once in a while something interrupts the pattern of death. Not a death on the battlefield, not one filled with music or mourning, just absence. A friend disappears from the market. A teacher no longer walks the usual path. No trumpet announces the moment. It comes and life continues, but something lingers. Plato was no stranger to this. He had watched his mentor, Socrates, sentenced to death by his own city, condemned not for crime, but for corrupting the youth with too many questions. In his dialogue Phaedo, Plato records the final hours of Socrates' life with the intimacy of someone watching a sacred ritual. But there are no weeping crowds, no shaking fists. Socrates drinks the hemlock quietly, discussing the soul even as his breath grows shallow. He is calm, composed, even amused. This wasn't a tragic ending. At least not to Socrates, and that puzzled many. How could one face death without fear, without grasping, without clinging? Socrates seemed to embrace it as though it were not the end, but a return to somewhere he had once known and somehow still remembered. Plato was deeply moved. And it is here, in the soft silence between the last words of his teacher and the cold cup on the table, that Plato began to ask, what, if anything, do we carry with us beyond that final breath? To ask such a question, Plato first had to study life, not death. He observed the rhythm of daily existence, how we strive, how we fail, how we learn. He saw how people devoted themselves to things they believed would outlast them: legacy, reputation, lineage, buildings, monuments, songs, but all of it faded. Even the Parthenon would one day crumble. Only one thing seemed to grow stronger with time, not weaker, and that was the soul's understanding. Its awakening. Plato envisioned the soul as something eternal, something that pre-existed the body and would endure beyond it. In his view, what we call learning is not acquiring knowledge, but remembering. The soul, he believed, once dwelled in a realm of perfect truths, what he called the world of forms or ideas. But upon entering a body, it forgets. It becomes entangled in sensation, in desire, in distraction. Life, then, is the slow act of recollection, of remembering who we are. And so Plato observed life not as a race to acquire, but as a quiet preparation, a cultivation. Each choice, each question, each moment of stillness or reflection becomes part of that process. For him, the soul leaves life carrying only what it has come to understand, its truths, its clarity, its virtue. Everything else, titles, possessions, fears, falls away like dust shaken from a cloak. In Phaedo, Plato has Socrates say that true philosophers are already half dead, but not in a morbid sense. What he means is that they are already practicing separation from the body, from impulse, from noise. Philosophy, then, is not an intellectual game, it is a form of spiritual exercise. A daily rehearsal for death, not to escape life, but to live it more purely. Imagine again that morning in Athens. The city hums with activity. But beneath it, in a quiet garden or shaded courtyard, a man or woman is contemplating the shape of justice, or the nature of beauty, or whether the soul survives the body. To most it seems abstract, impractical, but for Plato this is the most important work. Not because it prepares you for debate, but because it prepares your soul to depart. So when someone died quietly, without spectacle, is not always tragic, especially not if they had lived a life of inner clarity. Plato might have said, that person has remembered something true, they have prepared their soul for the journey home. The body remains behind like a garment no longer needed, but the soul continues on, carrying the only thing it truly owns, its understanding. And so we return to our question. What do you take with you when you die? Not your wealth, not your name, not even your memories and the way you think, but something quieter, deeper. Perhaps what you take is a kind of readiness, a condition of the soul that has learned to see clearly, to desire rightly, to release what is fleeting and hold to what is real. This is the heart of Plato's vision. And it begins not in some final act of heroism or enlightenment, but in the ordinary, everyday ways we live, in the way we speak to others, in what we seek when no one is watching, in the questions we ask when the world grows quiet. And so, in that peaceful morning light of ancient Athens, Plato's idea begins to form not just as a theory, but as a way of life. He does not call for us to fear death nor to obsess over it. Instead, he invites us to see life as a long remembering, a remembering of truths we once knew. And if we can do that, if we can gently awaken that knowledge in ourselves, then when the time comes, we will not face death with panic or confusion. We will meet it as Socrates did, with calm, with curiosity, with a soul unburdened by regret. Because we will have carried with us the one thing death cannot touch, the understanding of who we truly are. Plato did not merely speculate on the afterlife as a place of reward or punishment. That would have been too simple, too moralistic for his nuanced understanding of the soul. Instead, he proposed something much more demanding and perhaps much more meaningful. He believed that what you carry with you into death is your soul as condition, its level of clarity, of understanding, of harmony. In his philosophical universe, the soul is not a blank slate at birth, nor a passive recipient of experience. Rather, it is a divine spark, a part of a greater, timeless reality. Before entering the body, the soul resided in a realm of perfect forms, the invisible blueprints of all things, beauty, justice, truth. These were not mere concepts, but realities more real than anything in the material world. And when the soul entered a human body, it forgot. It fell into amnesia. What we call life, then, is not a journey of discovery, but of recollection. What we learn is what we remember. And what we remember is what we once knew, but not all memories are equal. What is remembered is shaped by how we live. A distracted soul, chasing pleasure or power, will remember little. A soul enslaved by opinion, noise, or fear will remain asleep. But a soul that disciplines itself, a soul that turns inward, that seeks truth for its own sake, will begin to awaken. To such a soul, death is not a defeat but a return, the end of one exile, the beginning of a greater homecoming. In this framework, knowledge is not simply intellectual accumulation, it is a form of purification. Every act of inquiry, of contemplation, of self-examination is an act of cleaning the mirror of the soul. Philosophy is not the act of gathering facts, but of aligning the soul with the eternal. It is the path of integration, where thought, virtue, and being converge. That is why, for Plato, the philosopher is the one most prepared for death, not because they are morbid, but because they are honest. Honest about what is fleeting, honest about what is lasting, Honest about the fact that what matters most cannot be seen, cannot be touched, cannot be stolen. It must be cultivated within. In Phaedo, as Socrates prepares to die, he tells his companions that the body is a prison, that the senses deceive, that truth does not reside in the physical world but beyond it. His friends are grieved, confused, but Socrates is serene. He explains that the soul of the philosopher has spent a lifetime detaching from the distractions of the body, training itself to listen not with ears but with reason, to see not with eyes but with the mind. And so, when death comes, it merely completes the work the philosopher has already begun. The soul, liberated from the body, returns to the realm of forms, but, and this is crucial, it does not return unchanged. It carries with it the shape it has acquired in life. If it has remembered well, if it has lived with virtue and clarity, it returns light, ascending, near the divine. If it has lived in ignorance, clinging to illusion, it returns heavy, confused, pulled back toward embodiment, perhaps into another life, another chance to remember. This is why Plato sees education not as the filling of a vessel, but as the turning of the soul, a reorientation. In his dialogue Republic, he uses the image of the cave. Humans, chained from birth, watch shadows on the wall and mistake them for reality. One person escapes, ascends into the light, and sees the world as it truly is. That ascent, that painful, slow, dazzling journey toward the sun is the path of philosophy. It is not about cleverness or debate. It is about transformation. And so, Plato's answer to our question becomes clearer. What do you take with you when you die? Only that which you have seen in the light. Only that which your soul has come to know not through opinion, but through awakening. The soul is not weighed by deeds in the sense of quantity, but by the quality of understanding it has come to embody. To live, then, is to prepare for death not in fear, but in focus, not in anxiety, but in alignment. Each moment becomes an opportunity to tune the soul, to bring it into greater harmony with what is timeless. The practice of philosophy is the slow refining of the inner instrument. And death, when it comes, is merely the silence that reveals whether the music was ever truly there. This is not a comforting doctrine in the conventional sense. It does not promise an afterlife of rewards or punishments to enemies. It does not offer certainty or even closure. Instead, it offers responsibility. Radical, gentle, personal responsibility. For Plato, we are not judged by an external God, but by the nature of our own soul. And that judgment is not a sentence, it is a direction, a gravity, a return to the place we have prepared for ourselves, moment by moment, thought by thought. It's easy, in modern life, to dismiss such ideas as abstract or outdated. We have so much to distract us, so many notifications, obligations, entertainments. The soul is often the last thing we think about. But if Plato were among us now, he might say, this is exactly when philosophy is most needed. Not in times of certainty, but in times of noise. Not in temples, but in traffic. Not in books, but in the act of turning inward when everything outside is pulling us away. Perhaps, deep down, we already sense this, that what we carry with us beyond this life is not our resumes, our possessions, our digital identities, but something much quieter, much older, much more honest. Something we've been shaping every time we choose truth over comfort, integrity over image, depth over ease. And if we live with that awareness, if we slowly, gently, patiently allow the soul to remember what it once knew, then death will not be a rupture, but a recognition, a homecoming. The Stoics, though not strictly aligned with Plato, found themselves returning again and again to a familiar truth, that what matters most is not what happens to us, but what we become through it. While Plato theorized about the immortality of the soul and its journey through realms unseen, the Stoics turned their gaze inward toward the discipline of the self, the shaping of character, the art of becoming sovereign within. They may not have spoken in terms of pre-existent souls or remembered forms, but their vision of a life well lived was just as demanding and just as liberating. Death for them was not something to be feared or even mourned. It was a moment like any other in nature, a return, a dissolution, a reintegration. And like Plato, they believed that we carry nothing with us but the condition of our inner being. Consider Marcus Aurelius, emperor of Rome, who ruled millions yet sat alone each night, writing to himself in humble, searching words. In meditations, he reminds himself often, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think." It was not a threat, it was a guiding light, a call to clarity. He was not preparing for death with panic, but with philosophy. To the Stoics, every day was a preparation for the last, but not in the anxious sense we might imagine, not in dread. Rather, in lucidity. They practiced a kind of emotional minimalism, not detachment from life, but detachment from illusion. Seneca, the Roman statesman and philosopher, urged his readers to rehearse death regularly, not to become numb, but to become awake. "He who learns to die," he wrote, "unlearns slavery." For the Stoics, the only true possession was virtue. Everything else was indifferent: health, wealth, social standing, even reputation. These could be taken, lost, ruined, without touching the core of the self. But virtue, understood as the harmony of one's reasoning soul with the order of nature, was inviolable. It was not given by fortune, nor could it be destroyed by misfortune. It was, in the end, the only thing worth cultivating. And so we see a deep resonance with Plato, where Plato believed the soul must remember its divine origin. The Stoics believed the soul must live in accordance with its rational nature. Both traditions saw philosophy not as theory but as training. Not as abstraction but as preparation. For Plato, the philosopher is one who dies before death, because they have loosened their grip on the physical. For the Stoics, the sage is one who greets death not as a foe, but as a natural part of the order they have embraced all along. Epictetus, once a slave, became a towering Stoic voice. In his discourses, he said, "Keep death and exile before your eyes each day, along with everything that seems terrible, ... Then you'll never have a base thought, nor will you have an excessive desire." He did not mean that we should live in terror. He meant that we should live with scale, with proportion, that we should stop inflating the significance of things that are, in the larger frame, so small. Fame, luxury, applause, these are nothing. Death teaches us that, and so it becomes not our enemy, but our greatest teacher. The Stoics invited us to stand calmly in the presence of impermanence, to look upon all things health, success, relationships, with eyes that understood their passing nature. This is not coldness. It is clarity. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself often that even his name, even Rome itself, would one day be forgotten. And that was not tragic. That was truth. "You are a soul," he wrote, "carrying a corpse." Not to diminish life, but to awaken us to what actually endures. Both Plato and the Stoics would agree. The only real tragedy is to reach the end of life without having lived according to what is real. To have filled the years with distraction, noise, illusion, and to have left the soul unshaped. Both philosophies, in their own way, challenge us to ask, what are you making of your soul today? Are you refining it? Are you clarifying it? Or are you covering it with dust? There is a story attributed to Epictetus. A student once asked him how to achieve freedom. Epictetus replied, "Learn to wish that everything happens as it does." This, in essence, is Stoicism, a radical acceptance, not of injustice or passivity, but of reality. A commitment to respond, not to react. To act with integrity, even when the world is crumbling around you. To carry peace, even as everything else is stripped away. And when that stripping reaches its final phase, when the body weakens, the breath shortens, the senses fade, the Stoic is not unprepared. They have, in a sense, already practiced this many times. Every day that they released attachment, every moment they chose reason over impulse, every time they acted from inner principle rather than outer pressure, they rehearsed death. And in doing so, they rehearsed freedom. There's a quiet nobility in this. No grand mythology, no celestial reward. Just the enduring truth that a life of virtue is its own fulfillment. Death, then, is not a punishment or a reward, it is a mirror. It shows you what you have become. And if you have lived well, if your choices have aligned with truth, then death can take nothing from you. Because you have already given yourself to something greater. In this way, the Stoic approach to death is not somber, but luminous. It reminds us that there is, in every moment, a chance to return to ourselves. A chance to act not from fear, but from clarity. A chance to remember, as Plato might say, the truth that lives deep within. And perhaps when the time comes, we will carry that truth with us gently, quietly, into whatever comes next. Because in the end, we do not take with us our trophies or regrets, our wealth or wounds. We take only the shape of the soul we have forged through effort, through stillness, through choice. Across centuries and continents, human beings have buried their dead with objects sometimes mundane, sometimes magnificent. A wooden comb, a bowl of figs, a spear, a ring, a mask made of gold. Each object, carefully chosen, was a gesture, a whisper to the unknown, a quiet hope that something of us goes on, and that what we place beside the body might accompany it on a journey we do not yet understand. The ancient Egyptians built pyramids not just as tombs, but as maps of eternity. Inside, the pharaoh's body was mummified, his organs stored in alabaster jars, his treasures sealed in gilded rooms. There were boats for sailing the underworld, servants sculpted in miniature, spells etched on walls. To the Egyptians, death was not an end, it was a passage through the Duat, the night sea of the gods. And so one must be prepared, as one would be for a voyage, with food, tools, instructions, and symbols of one's rank. Thousands of miles east, in ancient China, similar practices emerged. In the tomb of Emperor Jing of Han, archaeologists discovered terracotta warriors, not the famous ones of Qin Shi Huang, but a smaller, more intimate army. There were musicians, dancers, farmers, animals, figures that painted a portrait of everyday life. The emperor, even in death, would be surrounded by a reflection of the world he knew. But beneath this lay a philosophical idea as well, that life and death were not opposites, but continuities. One flowed into the other. And in Greece, so often the intellectual home of the West, there too, we find evidence not only of ritual, but of meaning. The Greeks buried their dead with coins placed beneath the tongue or on the eyes. These were not for the living, but for the dead. Payment to Charon, the ferryman who guided souls across the river Styx. Without the coin, the soul might be left wandering. The message was clear. Even the dead had business to conduct, passage to secure, and the living had a duty to equip them for it. But perhaps the most haunting burials are the ones where, instead of gold or weapons or tokens of status, archaeologists have found something else: scrolls, fragments of writing, lines of philosophy. In southern Italy, in what was once known as Magna Graecia, the burial site of a man, neither king nor soldier, revealed only one significant item: a worn copy of Plato's Phaedo. No jewels, no armor, only words, only ideas. It's easy to overlook such a find. It lacks the grandeur of a golden mask or an enameled chalice. But in many ways it's more profound. For it suggests that this man believed something quite radical, that the most valuable thing he could carry into death was thought itself. Not comfort, not proof, not protection, but understanding. This was not unique. In the Orphic traditions of the ancient world, initiates were sometimes buried with small gold tablets inscribed with sacred instructions. These weren't maps of geography, but maps of the soul. They told the departed how to recognize certain rivers in the underworld, which deities to approach, what to say when questioned. But more than this, they reflected a belief that wisdom mattered beyond life, that the soul was not just weighed by judgment, but guided by knowledge. The symbolism here is powerful. While empires crumbled and dynasties fell, what these individuals tried to preserve, what they dared to send with the soul, was not riches, but awareness. That is, perhaps, the quiet echo of Plato's vision. That when all else is stripped away, what remains is what the mind has understood. And that this understanding, hard-earned, inward, deeply personal, is the one thing that death cannot dissolve. Across many cultures, we see echoes of this same principle, differently clothed. In parts of pre-Columbian Mesoamerica, burial goods often included musical instruments and writing tools. The Maya, who saw death as a kind of transformation, painted tomb walls with stories, scenes of gods and ancestors, rites and rebirths. The dead were not silenced. They were expected to speak, to remember, to navigate the afterlife with discernment. Again and again, cultures around the world seemed to agree. The soul would travel, and it would need more than weapons. It would need wisdom. Even in more recent times, Echoes of these ancient practices remain. In some parts of Eastern Europe, people were buried with books stitched into their shrouds. In Victorian England, mourning jewelry sometimes contained inscriptions of verses or philosophical quotes worn close to the skin, as if to remind both the living and the dead of deeper truths. The artifacts changed, the materials changed, but the impulse did not. This challenges us to think about our own era. Today, we spend much of our lives collecting not scrolls or tokens, but data. Passwords, photos, online histories. Our legacies are increasingly digital, our memories stored in cloud servers rather than stone. But when the moment comes when we close our eyes for the last time, what travels with us? If Plato or a Stoic were to look at a modern burial, they might be puzzled by how much we bury the body with and how little we seem to prepare the soul. They might ask, where are your meditations? Where is the record of your inner life? What thoughts, what questions, what values did you nourish? Perhaps that is what makes the grave with the Phaedo scroll so arresting. It suggests that someone in a world full of myth and material offering chose philosophy as their provision. Not because it offered guarantees, but because it offered grounding, a kind of compass for the soul. There's something beautifully paradoxical about placing fragile paper beside a decaying body. Both are so vulnerable, so easily destroyed. And yet, what those words represent, what they awaken, transcends both ink and flesh. The soul, as Plato taught, cannot carry gold, but it might carry wisdom. And that, perhaps, is why some left behind no wealth, no family crest, no monument, only a book, only a question, only an idea. Because if the soul survives, it will not be because of what it owned. It will be because of what it understood. Far from Athens, high in the Himalayas, another tradition grew quiet, austere, radiant with insight. Where Plato imagined the soul ascending toward a world of eternal forms, and the Stoics trained the self to meet death with clarity and integrity, Buddhism offered something both similar and radically different. It did not promise an immortal soul, nor fixate on metaphysical destinations. Instead, it focused on consciousness, its habits, its clarity, its awakening. And in the Tibetan Buddhist view, the moment of death is not the end of consciousness, but the most critical transition of all. This transition is known as bardo, a Tibetan term meaning in between. It refers not only to the state between death and rebirth, but to any transitional state of consciousness. The most famous teaching on this is the Bardo Thodol, often translated as the Tibetan Book of the Detta Guide for the Dying read aloud at the bedside. Sometimes over days as the soul, or rather the stream of consciousness, navigates the delicate, luminous terrain that opens after the final breath. In this teaching, what you carry with you is not your name, your story, or even your memories in the usual sense. You carry the imprint of your mind, your habits, your clarity, your awareness. In this view, death is like falling into a lucid dream, one shaped by your deepest mental tendencies. If the mind is clouded by fear, attachment, or ignorance, it will become lost in its own projections. But if the mind is trained through meditation, ethical living, and insight, it can awaken, even in death. And awakening here means freedom, liberation from the cycle of rebirth, from suffering, from illusion. This mirrors Plato in an unexpected way. He spoke of the soul remembering the world of forms, slowly recollecting its divine origin through a life of contemplation. The Tibetan view, though not based in recollection, similarly asserts that truth is already present, but obscured like the sun hidden by clouds. Practice, whether philosophical or meditative, is a clearing away, a peeling back. What is revealed is not something new, but something original. And just as Plato believed that the soul carries with it the fruits of its philosophical training, the Tibetans believe that the mind brings into the bardo the fruits of its cultivation, not beliefs, not doctrine, but mental discipline, clarity, the ability to remain awake amid chaos. In the bardo teachings, the moment of death is said to be followed by extraordinary perceptions, visions of light, sound, color, and forms that are deeply symbolic. These are not hallucinations, but manifestations of our IGPI, the fundamental non-dual awareness that is the nature of mind itself. For the untrained, these visions can be terrifying, misinterpreted. They might be clung to, or rejected, or simply overwhelmed. And this confusion leads the stream of consciousness to take on another body, another life, repeating the wheel. But for the practiced mind, for one who has stabilized attention, softened ego, and cultivated insight, these visions are recognized for what they are. Not external beings, but expressions of one's own nature. And with that recognition comes liberation. Death, then, is not a judgment or a punishment. It is an opportunity, a space of possibility, but only if the mind is ready. This perspective reframes our question, what do you take with you when you die? In precise and profound terms, you take only your state of mind. Not just at the moment of death, but as shaped over a lifetime. The ripples of every act of mindfulness, every moment of compassion, every time you saw through illusion rather than believed it. These are not abstract virtues, but real neural patterns, real energetic impressions, real mental karma. What you take with you is not symbolic, it is structural. It's a subtle teaching and not always easy to grasp in our goal-oriented culture. We often ask, what can I achieve? What can I know? What can I leave behind? But in this tradition, the real question is, what can I release? What can I see clearly? What can I take with me in silence when the body has dropped and even thought begins to unravel? And again, a curious alignment with Stoicism emerges. Epictetus taught that we must never cling to what is not ours. Not health, not reputation, not even the body. All these are lent by nature and will be taken back. The only thing that belongs to us is how we respond. The Tibetans would agree, though with different language. They would say, the only thing that travels on is karma, not punishment, not reward, but the momentum of mental tendencies. If you trained in anger, you travel in anger. If you trained in peace, you travel in peace. This is why meditation, in the Tibetan context, is not just a spiritual luxury. It is essential preparation, it is rehearsal for dying. And not in a gloomy sense, but in a luminous one. To sit quietly and observe the breath is to begin to familiarize yourself with impermanence. To watch thoughts rise and pass is to begin to see through them. To meet fear without flinching is to prepare for that final letting go when there is no more breath and only awareness remains. Some might call this mystical. Others might call it psychological, but at its heart, it is profoundly human. It speaks to the universal desire not to be caught unaware by death, not to be swallowed by it in confusion or regret, but to meet it not with certainty, but with serenity. And if we return to the image of the man buried with Phaedo, perhaps now it makes even more sense. Because Phaedo is a text not only about death, but about the state of mind that allows one to die well. It is, in a way, a Western Bardo Thodol, a philosophical guide through the unknown, composed not of dogma, but of reasoned reflection. It urges the reader to prepare not through belief, but through understanding. And so, East and West, Athens and Tibet, philosophy and meditation, these seemingly distant worlds begin to speak in harmony. They whisper a shared truth, that the self is not what it owns, nor even what it thinks, but how it sees. That death does not erase what is true, but reveals what has been real all along. Perhaps, then, the greatest question is not, what happens after death? But what am I becoming now? Because what you take with you is not a thing. It is a direction, a momentum, a quality of presence that is built not in cathedrals, but in moments, in silence, in study, in each breath. In the modern world, we rarely think about what we might carry with us when we die. Not in the way Plato meant it, not as a philosophical inventory of the soul. Instead, we think in terms of legacy, in terms of inheritance, in terms of data. We store, we back up, we accumulate documents, photos, diplomas, titles. Our calendars are full. Our cloud storage is full. And our minds more often than not are full too, but full of what? Look around. Our society is a monument to possession. Not just material things, but intellectual ones, certifications, resumes, checklists of achievement. We collect experiences like souvenirs, images like trophies, followers like currency. We prepare for every possibility, retirement, disaster, disruption, but rarely for the one certainty that all of this will one day be left behind. And so the ancient question arises again, this time not from a philosopher's lips, but from the silent space between notifications, when everything is taken away. What remains? Plato would answer, the condition of your soul, the clarity of your mind, the degree to which you have remembered the real. The Stoics would echo, your character, your virtue. The things within your control, your choices, your values, your trained perspective. And the Buddhists would smile gently and say, your consciousness, your habits, your awareness at the moment of letting go. But today, we live as if the mind were just a tool and extension of our productivity. We rarely stop to ask if it's being cultivated, deepened, or even rested. We worry about forgetting our passwords, but not about forgetting ourselves. And so we fear loss, not just death, but any loss, loss of position, loss of image, loss of things we never truly owned to begin with. The fear creeps in quietly. If I lose this, who will I be? And underneath that, if everything is taken from me, will there be anything left? This is not a new fear. But it may be more urgent now, precisely because we've tied identity so tightly to external roles and digital mirrors. We confuse the profile with the person. And that confusion makes us vulnerable not just to death, but to life itself. To the changes, the setbacks, the inevitable dissolving of what cannot last. It is here that the Stoics speak again, not with ancient gravity, but with precise relevance. You have power over your mind, not outside events, wrote Marcus Aurelius. Realize this and you will find strength. In a world that measures us by speed, scale, and attention, the Stoic reminds us that real worth is internal and invisible. And Plato, across millennia, would nod. He would remind us that what we often call knowledge is only opinion unless it transforms the soul. That true education is not accumulation, but recollection. And that what matters is not how much we know, but how deeply we understand. What's missing today is not information. It's orientation. We have maps, but we've lost direction. We have tools, but no shared sense of purpose. And in the noise of this abundance, it becomes harder to hear the soul. Harder to ask, what is the shape of the self I'm becoming? What am I taking with me, not in my pockets, but in my being? Here, the quiet voice of Eastern philosophy joins the conversation again. Buddhism teaches that suffering arises from attachment to things, to identities, to illusions of permanence. And liberation comes not from denying the world, but from seeing it clearly. As it is, changing, impermanent, beautiful, but not graspable. In this light, modern life is a paradox. We build towers of convenience, of comfort, of choice. But without wisdom, these towers become prisons made not of stone, but of anxiety. And when the time comes to die, and it will, we find we are unprepared. Not because we lacked comfort, but because we never cultivated clarity. We are not asked to become monks or philosophers, but we are invited by death itself to live as if we were more than consumers, to live as if our time mattered, as if our minds were gardens, not inboxes, as if our daily choices formed the soul we would one day carry beyond breath. And so the question returns more quietly now, more insistently. Are you preparing to die not with fear, but with attention? This is not morbid, it is tender. It is the most human question. Because to prepare for death is, paradoxically, to prepare for life. Not to hoard it, or escape it, or perform it, but to be present for it. To train the mind not to control, but to witness. To orient the soul not toward achievement, but toward alignment with truth, with peace, with what cannot be taken away. In this sense, Plato's vision was not mystical fantasy. It was psychological realism. He understood that the soul becomes what it practices. If we practice greed, we become restless. If we practice resentment, we become bitter. If we practice stillness, we become spacious. Death does not change this. It only reveals it. And the Stoics would say, if you fear death, look at your life. Not to measure it by trophies, but by tone. Is it honest? Is it grounded? Is it free from regret? The Buddhist would answer not with words, but with silence. With breath, with a steady gaze into the present moment, for it is here and only here that preparation happens. Not in what we own, but in what we are. So perhaps the modern tragedy is not death itself, but our unexamined life before it. A life filled with motion but lacking stillness, with data but lacking wisdom, with connection but lacking depth. And perhaps the invitation is this, to begin today not by adding more, but by returning to simplicity, to clarity, to the quiet task of becoming the kind of soul that, when death arrives, has nothing to cling to and nothing to fear. Plato would call this philosophy, the Stoics would call it virtue. The Buddhists might call it awareness. But whatever the name, the path is the same, a gentle, daily shaping of the self. Not for display, not for others, but for that final moment when all falls away and only truth remains. So now we return to the question. The one that echoed at the beginning like a whisper behind all of life's noise. What do you take with you when you die? Not your titles, not your photographs, not your passwords or your accolades. You do not take your followers, you do not take your apartment, you do not take the roles others gave you, or even the ones you carefully constructed. What remains is quieter and deeper. You take with you the condition of your mind, the texture of your soul, the way you live, not in theory, but in the smallest, most private choices. Did you meet life with openness or resistance? Did you nourish clarity or cling to distraction? Did you remember yourself or did you forget? Plato believed that death reveals the shape of a life that the soul, stripped of its body, shows its true form. The Stoics believed that death cannot harm the virtuous because their worth lies within. And the Buddhists remind us that what travels on is not what we loved or feared, but how we met each moment, how we breathed through it, how we let go. So let us ask gently, not in fear, but in honesty, if today were your last, what would you carry? Would you bring a heavy mind, crowded with unfinished lists, unspoken truths, unresolved regrets? Or would you bring a quiet heart worn, yes, but awake? A soul shaped by effort, by inquiry, by presence? No one can answer that for you. But every day is a chance to shape that answer. You do not need to renounce your life. You only need to return to it, deeply, attentively, as if it mattered, because it does. Philosophy, in the end, is not a subject, it is a way of being, a way of preparing for that final threshold not with fear, but with readiness, not with baggage, but with understanding. So live now as someone who will one day leave, not morbidly, but meaningfully, as someone who knows that what you carry at the end is what you practiced in each passing moment. Thank you for walking this journey with us. See you in the next meditation.